I'm going to begin with a quick story about some of the complexities that arise that I hope you can relate to, even though they may be painful when it comes to navigating and leading work that's designed to have social benefit, work that's designed to have positive impacts for your clients. And this happened several years ago on a public-private partnership that I had the privilege of being a part of and helping to lead. And I'll take full responsibility for some of the things that actually I'll take full responsibility because as a leader, you're the one in charge, right? Whether it went the way you hoped it would or not. This particular program involved a series of nonprofits, for-profits, farmer associations. We were really working on conservation agriculture, outreaching and engaging farmers and ranchers around things like soil health, water quality, water conservation, etc. And we were working with several state offices of a major government agency. And part of that work involved designing regional resources for farmers in that area. So you can think about, workbooks, field days, many of the kinds of things I suspect many of you across Extension do, whether you work with farmers or other client audiences. And in the course of building this program and starting to deploy some of these resources to local farmers, we quickly became aware that one of these agencies, their local office, boots on the ground, those who are interfacing and working with farmers every day, was not satisfied with how things were going. And when we sat down and had a conversation, miscommunication was a huge barrier to this particular part of the project. The conversation went something like this, and I'm going to paraphrase. The agency local leader said something to the effect of, what you promised us was that we would have farmers lining up at our door, ready to work with us and receive these specific services. And what we're getting is basically no one walking through the door at all. As you can imagine, lots of egg on my face. And we were able to navigate a successful outcome when we sort of stepped back and said, well, here's what the original scope said. Here's what we intended to say. And here's what we're going to do to try to make things right and get you closer to your goal of actually having farmers to work with and partner with and serve, because that's part of your mission. That's just a very small example, but something like that can seem to come from out of the blue, and it can take weeks, if not months, of time to repair and get the right thing, right? Because at that point, you not only have to deliver on the things you've promised programmatically, but you're also working to rebuild trust, which is your most important asset on any kind of funded project like this. And so in today's session, what I really want to do is sort of share some observations I've made, consider it a fireside monologue with hopefully lots of great insights from all of you about these projects, right? It could be a $20,000 grant, it could be a $10 million grant. My observation working with multiple clients across agriculture, food, etc., has been that these kinds of things are universal, and there are some practical steps we can take, or maybe some mindsets we can consider that can make each of these projects not only more effective in delivering the outcomes we've committed to delivering, but perhaps even more importantly, for the joy and satisfaction that you and your colleagues and your partners get out of doing this work in the first place. Because ultimately, you want to deliver on the work and you want to deliver on your purpose, right? Why are you in Extension to begin with? So let's go ahead and dive in. The 3 learning objectives I've sort of highlighted for today's conversation. Number 1, I want to identify 5 hard truths about grant project implementation. Now, some of these will come before implementation, like pre-award, so I'll call that out in a moment. Most of these, though, are like in the weeds of getting the work done day to day. The second piece is really thinking about and learning strategies to take those truths, which can be hard to hear, frankly, and hard to experience, and turn those things into opportunities. And then finally, I want to use insights that I've experienced from other leaders and from my own experience to help you see and work toward the outcomes and long-term vision you've established, not just for a specific program or for a specific university, but for yourself as well, right? For your career. What are you hoping to achieve? What impact do you want to have when you look back on your career? And again, these things can ultimately make or break us, right? They can make us stronger, they can drive us crazy in the moment, but ultimately, my perspective is that these things can be really catalysts for greater impact and more powerful work for all of your clients. Okay, so I promised interactive, and I'm going to deliver on that to the best of my ability. I want to pause and ask all of you to type some thoughts into the chat. What is the number one thing that drives you crazy about grant-funded projects? This could be any project, right? It could just be something that's part of your regular day-to-day. But I'm really thinking about challenges, right? Like, where is the pain the greatest? And there's no shame in sharing, any ideas or thoughts that come to mind, because I suspect that there may be some patterns, but it may be very unique depending on what region of the country you work in, what clients you serve, etc. So I will pause, and I'd love for you to type into the chat the challenges that you encounter regularly. Okay, we've got some great thoughts coming into the chat. So I see, let's just see here. Let me scroll back up. Paula says lack of proper management, program and project management, 100%. Getting organizational systems in place, navigating that and managing actual delivery of the outcomes you promised, a huge burden, it can feel like, right? Roshan, getting started and bringing all the stakeholders together. Yes, like how do we kickstart this process and make everyone on the same page so that we're all working off of the same insights, understanding, timeline. Caitlin, lack of clarity on expectations. Things tend to be broad. Yes, when you're working on the proposal phase, right, you've got a grand vision, but then when it comes to doing the work, you start to discover things that you never really thought through all the way, right? Because there's simply not enough time in the day, not enough brain power, typically when you're putting together a proposal. Celeste, changing of staff mid-project. Yes, 100%. Scope not matching capacity of personnel. We'll address that later today. Oh my goodness, this is great. Way too many to keep up with. But yes, please read what's in the chat, because I think you will find some common cause with people who are in the room today, right? Poor communication, short turnaround time, funding and reimbursement. Yeah, so again, we've had lots of engagement across this series, but this is probably the most comments I've seen yet in 6 workshops together. So yes. Oh, Gloria, I like that. Who's in charge of what? Figuring out where to start can feel very overwhelming. Absolutely. Really, really good stuff. Thank you all. So we will talk about many of these today, but you can clearly see, right, there are pain points. This is not just a walk in the park. If it were, like, you wouldn't be able to bring your best and brightest to the table. You wouldn't be challenged, which probably would get boring after a while. But in the moment, it can feel like a sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. It can feel like your mouth is getting dry because you have no idea where to begin, or what to tell the people who maybe report to you or work alongside of you. So the challenge is real, right? And I want to acknowledge that. Quickly on my background, I think you've seen this a million times. I come from a media background, a business leadership background, specifically in climate smart agriculture. But really helping in my consulting practice today, helping nonprofit executives find greater joy in their work, have bigger impact by thinking through and implementing template systems, strategies to reduce friction and compound joy. And if I can accomplish that, not only for those leaders, but also for the clients they serve, which in my world tends to be anyone who's benefits from the outdoors, whether you're a farmer or someone who eats or someone who recreates or whatever, then I've achieved my goal. And that's what I hope to do today, is give you a little bit of that, a bit of a sigh of relief that, like, you share these challenges and there is hope to work through them. Okay, let me give you a preview of where we're going over the next, let's say 30 minutes or so, because I want to leave about 30 minutes toward the end for Q&A and some conversation. So the 5 hard truths about project implementation. Again, this is from my experience. What I see in the comments reflects a lot of what I've seen as well. Time and effort is number one. It is nearly impossible when you are putting together a grant proposal or designing a program of work, even if it's modifying something you've done in the past. It's almost impossible to exactly predict everything as it's going to unfold, right? If we were able to accurately predict the future in any area of life, all of the commentators on the news would be out of business tomorrow. We can't do that, unfortunately, right? We don't have perfect knowledge. And so consequently, we need to build systems that protect us from ourselves, right? When it comes to planning the time and effort it's going to take to get things done. Secondly, plan shift, right? Plan for things to change, plan for things to evolve as a program unfolds. And it may be entirely upended, right? One of the comments was, okay, people who leave mid-project. Well, now you've got to find a replacement or make do with the people in the budget you have, or retrain somebody, or communicate that to the funder. Again, there are all sorts of ripple effects that come from just that one thing. And so being able to anticipate that and build resilience into your program operations, which can be very lean and very nimble. I totally recognize that is really important. Third, complex collaborations, right? There is nothing easy about working with human beings, much as we love them and need them, right? And I suspect, this is just a hypothesis, as we continue to move into this world of artificial intelligence, virtual communities, these skills are going to become even more important, not only for all of us here on this call, but for future generations who come behind you to carry on the torch of extension. So training around this and building systems and building knowledge and capacity around how do we work with people, no matter the environment, right? Face-to-face, virtual, everything in between, will only become more important in the future. Fourth, intelligence reimagined. So I'm not talking about artificial intelligence here. You can go back and look on YouTube at the past workshop we had about generative AI. What I'm talking about here is emotional intelligence, right? How do I learn to ask good questions, be curious, collaborate productively, overcome conflict? That probably matters as much or more than anything else you do, right? You may have a PhD or a master's degree in any number of disciplines. Those things matter a lot. Being able to work with people and navigate through to actually have the impact in your discipline or your chosen field is even more important, because again, if you don't have that piece, none of the rest of it happens. And then finally, devilish details, right? Not to pick on people who write RFPs or audit government documents, but the details really do matter, right? Having someone personnel change mid-course, having a budget change, that has to be documented, it has to be communicated. You have to still explain how you're going to get to the outcomes you committed to, or if things are going to be changing, then why, and how that's superior to what you planned. Again, details do matter, despite the fact that some of this may feel more soft or squishy, right? Like getting along with other people sounds like something from kindergarten, but it actually turns out to be way more complex than I think any of us probably appreciate when we start our careers. Okay, so let's dive in, and let me talk first about turning challenges into opportunities when it comes to time and effort. And this is the part of the session where I said we were going to address sort of pre-award primarily, is where I really see this come into play and where I see a lot of leaders struggle. First of all, I saw several comments in the chat around project management support. And what I mean by project management is understanding a scope of work, right? What is this grant proposal? If we are successful in receiving an award, what is this program going to look like? Who's going to staff it? What's the budget? On what timeline is it going to be completed? It's all of the little minutia that add up to that finished product or outcome that you're working toward. There was a long time, I was deep into my career before I even knew that project management was like a job function. And my experience is also that a lot of organizations, academia, nonprofit, especially small to mid-level, or again, working in very targeted disciplines, may not have the benefit of a dedicated full-time project manager. In fact, many times you probably very likely don't. And so learning project management skills and using tools and resources at your disposal are really, really important. And even better if you think about those things up front, right? Understanding the staffing commitment that's going to be required, actually assigning individual people to specific parts of project management, right? So who's going to lay out the scope of work in enough detail so that we know in this month, on this week, these are the activities. On these dates, these are the deadlines. This is when we have to invoice. This is when we have to report. Again, to people like, I sort of toe the line, right? Part of me loves that stuff, like getting into the details because I want to do a good job and show my funder, what I'm capable of, what my team is capable of. The other part of me, those kinds of minutia can drive me absolutely nuts. You may relate to that. But finding someone, a colleague, or learning enough of those skills to be dangerous, to be able to actually lay something out and think about the implications and then buffer in enough time in case something goes south, which we'll talk about a lot today. If things don't work out, how am I anticipating that and building that into my timeline and project deliverables? So that's sort of the people part, right? I assign individuals to help you do this, or do it yourself, and then delegate as appropriate as you have staff and resources. And then technology. So I've often used project management systems like Asana or Trello, and you can do all kinds of research. You could spend a lifetime. Again, ChatGPT or tools like that can be a great resource to say, help me brainstorm. You are an expert project manager. Help me brainstorm the leading software platforms to do this. Give me the pros and cons of each, and take a little information about my situation. Help me see what might be best, right? You may have a small software allocation or tools you already use with an extension that can help you with this. Again, as a leader, if you're the one sort of applying for funding or leading the implementation, if at all possible, I don't recommend you be both the doer and the project manager, because oftentimes that can be like two full-time jobs. You may have no choice though. And so in that case, again, build a system, use tools that make sense for you. In some cases, like I often resort to like an Excel spreadsheet with a list of a tab that says, August, September, and dedicating out specific activities. Who is the point person to complete each of those things or to lead it to fruition, etc. So again, just think about some practical things that can really help you move projects forward before the project even gets awarded funding, if possible. Second, comparing calendars and scheduling conflicts. This goes very closely with the one next to it, which says evaluate capacity. Many grants, especially federal government, private philanthropy, will want to know what percentage of staff time is going to be allocated to this project you are proposing. Which other projects are you already working on, right? So you're going to have to give an account to them anyway. So this is a great excuse for you internally to have some conversations around, do we even have the ability to do this? If we're going to hire people, is there a clear process for doing that? Or are we going to have to invent the process, find the people, train them, and then do the work, right? So again, the more you can template and streamline up front versus building on the fly, again, you're saving yourselves hours of stress, of friction, of difficult conversations. If you can plan for those and anticipate those key pain points, that becomes your agenda for staff meetings, for individual planning time at your desk, thinking through some of those challenges and trying to find the most seamless path to find the people, do the training, push pause on things if you can, juggle things if you can't push pause, etc. Think about not just what is going to happen in the next month or the next 4 weeks, but about what's going to happen. Let's assume this award gets awarded when they say, which is September. And let's also think about a worst case scenario, right? What if the funding isn't allocated until January? Okay, well, what do we have coming up in January that might create a negative domino effect, right? Where we suddenly have all of these competing projects and priorities, and now we're scrambling to figure out how to do the work that we've committed to the funder is going to get done, right? So again, think far out. Think, again, I tend to be I like to think I'm an optimistic pessimist, right? I try to anticipate the things that could go wrong and plan for a worst case scenario, but have everything set up so that hopefully everything runs as smoothly and as close to plan as possible. So again, just some pointers on things to think through. I suspect you're already deep in the weeds on these things, but it doesn't hurt to refresh our minds about them. The next thing, count all the costs before you commit. Again, these are not just decisions that impact your budget, your capacity to report properly to a funder, your expertise for getting the work done. It also involves like you as a person, right? You have to be whole, mentally, emotionally, spiritually to get the work done. And so if you can anticipate as you're talking with your colleagues who will help you do this project, as you're thinking through things going on in your personal life or with your team's personal lives, again, the work needs to get done. And there's also a very human way to go about that so that you're really thinking about whose strengths would pair best with this project, who is maybe vocalizing some resistance to this project, and how can I get curious and unpack that so I understand, is there a seat for them on this bus, or is there another place that they would work better? And again, having those open conversations and admitting vulnerability, I think, as a leader going into a grant project or an opportunity and just saying, hey, I'm not really sure how to handle this. Here are the facts. Help me think this through. What are some possible options or scenarios that could get us to a successfully funded project and then help us successfully implement this once we have the funding in hand? And then finally, this last box, reality, not robots. What I'm saying here is take into account the fact that we are working in the ever-changing real world. The people you work with, you yourself included, are not robots who can run 24/7 like ChatGPT. At some point you need to sleep, at some point you need to eat, at some point you need to check in on how each other's doing. So, think about those things and how to make sure that whether you're pre-award, getting the award kick-started and trying to figure out where to begin, which many of you mentioned causes a lot of heartburn. I totally get it. I'm there often. Or whether you're deep into a project or successfully wrapping it up, there is going to be emotional highs and lows. There are going to be really great peaks where you achieve a great win or a great outcome that you were hoping for. There are going to be points where you wish you'd never started the project in the first place, right? So just be aware of that and be prepared to ride those waves by putting in systems and treating people with the kindness and dignity that they deserve. And I think you'll find it a much more pleasing experience. All right, so I'm going to take a pause and take a scan through the comments or any questions in the chat. I'm curious, what is your number one favorite advice or tip that you would give someone else within Extension for mitigating insanity, my tongue-in-cheek word, amid grants work, right? So when things get craziest, is there something you tell yourself, an affirmation? Is there a piece of advice that's really helped you or your colleagues see straight and keep going? Drop some thoughts in the chat. I'm really curious because I always am looking for good advice when things are especially bleak. I love Molly's comment about looking for all the project management tools, trying them all, and never finding the one. Molly, my heart goes out to you. It resonates very deeply because I am very guilty of starting a tool and then just abandoning it for something way more simple. So again, Google Docs, Google Sheets, again, not very professional, but it gets the job done. Not recommending that for everyone. I think there's way more everyone can do to professionalize, but if it's not your cup of tea or you have better systems, then I certainly don't fault you for that. I'm right there with you many times. Okay, I'm loving these thoughts. So breathe. Yes, oxygen is so important. I may have shared this on a previous workshop. My wife and I have been taking a parenting course, and just the importance of breathing had never dawned on me. Your brain needs oxygen to make good decisions. The phrase we learned was be a thermometer. Be a thermostat, not a thermometer, right? So I'm calm, I'm collected, I'm reading the room, but I'm not immediately jumping to 105 degrees on the thermometer and acting out however that might play out for you. Be a thermostat, not a thermometer. Love the idea of breathing, Carrie. Caitlin, you can only do one thing at a time. Yes, multitasking is the bane of a professional's existence. Jesse, make friends with folks in campus and the STAR funding office. 100%, yes, folks in finance are your friend. They bring skills, talents, ideas, perspectives. They can help you see around corners. Love that. Absolutely. Susan, Excel. Yes. Excel is fantastic for all kinds of functions, both the tool and, committing to the idea of excelling in your project. Sandra, keep your sense of humor. Yes, absolutely. Laugh at yourself. It is so hard to do. And I see so much on LinkedIn as just an example, professionals who work in my space doing amazing things. Again, I think there's this tendency to take ourselves so seriously that we forget we're here for a short time on earth. We've got a job to do. We've got some really cool opportunities and great people to work with. So let's stop being so uptight. Let's take a time to laugh and reflect and then, reevaluate. Let's see, Kristen, you can only do what you can do. Do your best, and the rest will come. Molly, use Google Tasks RN. Awesome. I'm going to ask you more about that. That's interesting. John David, focus on the approved scope, services, and outcomes of the funder. Yes, scope creep is real, right? You can get carried away doing things your funder didn't ask for, and that really detract from the mission and waste, candidly, valuable resources. So great points. Laura, schedule time to get it done. Yes. Gold, we had a wonderful program lead who offered to host a retreat to conceptualize ideas and thoughts, did a reflection check for our team. That's awesome. Just, yeah, thinking about the journey, right? Thinking about where you've been, where you're going, what changes might be needed, what's working really well to celebrate. I love that idea. Susan, reach out to the funder with questions. Yes. Sabrina, stepping away and getting fresh air, then refocusing. As a grant manager, create a spreadsheet with all the reportables and what that timeline looks like. Review it before the project and at least monthly to keep everyone on task, Roseanne says. I love that idea. And also a time to get help, right? Ask questions, raise concerns. Jean, visit your vacation plans. Yes, see how your vacation or time out of the office coincides with your project. And please take the time, right? Don't just abandon the vacation because you're too busy or the project can't afford to work without you. Like, projects all over the world, no matter the industry, whether nonprofit or for-profit, happen all the time, every day. With proper planning, you can do some amazing things. And it doesn't feel like it, though. I understand it doesn't feel like that at the time, but I love that advice. Evaluate as you go, John David, absolutely. Thank you all. This is fantastic. Okay, so let me go to point number 2, observations about turning challenges into opportunities. So the second field of advice that I would offer today, and again, take it for what it's worth, it's one person's experience, is that you should plan for shifts in your great detailed project management plan, right? So Molly's point earlier is hilarious and also totally true. You know, finding a project management tool is half the battle, but then once you build the plan, you also have this hesitation, this gnawing feeling in the back of your mind that even though I build the plan and invest all this time in the detail, it may get thrown out the window tomorrow when something changes. So you always need to balance, what do I need? I need enough detail so that I have peace of mind, number one, as the leader. Number two, my team has clarity on who's doing what by when. And a phrase I often like to use from the author, Dan Martell, is definition of done. I think I may have mentioned this before. What is the definition of done for this specific part of the work so that we're all on the same page that this is what the end product looks like, this is the outcome we're striving toward, we're talking about it in the same language. Definition of done can be a great tool to get there. So there's, again, balancing that tension can be challenging. Enough detail to do those things I just mentioned, but not enough detail that you don't have the ability to rework things when the plan inevitably changes. Okay, so some quick insights. First, envision second and third order effects. I've talked about this a little bit, but I'll just reiterate. Any project you have, any program of work has ripple effects, right? If things go perfectly to plan and nothing else changes in any of the other programs, projects, job responsibilities you have, there are no administrators knocking on your door, there's no major, university initiative that you weren't aware of, those things never happen, right? I suspect that's probably not right. And so thinking about second and third order effects, if something happens where we think we can engage this many farmers by this date, and the date approaches and we're not getting any further and we're starting to sweat a little bit, thinking about that well in advance, right? When you get started, always think in options, right? I've been taught over the years, and I highly recommend to all of my clients, always have at least 3 options for yourself, right? And you don't have to go through and detail everything for every specific task in your program of work, but certainly for the things that matter most, right? The key milestones, what ties back to the point someone raised in the chat a moment ago. Think about what the funder asked for and what you've committed to delivering. How are we going to make sure that if we get thrown off course, we've got other plans B and C and maybe a plan D in our back pocket to work through this, right? I also saw people in the chat saying, talk to your funder, right? It is always better to over-communicate, I have found, than to under-communicate, right? There are some people in this world, you can figure out which camp you belong to. Some people in this world who want to know everything, and in the absence of hearing any news, they assume that something must be terribly wrong, right? Silence means problems. There's another camp, at least one more camp, that believes that silence means things must be going great. So I always recommend, I don't play the lottery or gamble, but I do think that there is a strategy to leading a successful grant. And part of that is hedging your bets and assuming that the people that you're working with, your funders, your partners, are probably a combination of those two ideologies, which are very much polar opposites. And so hewing toward the middle and coming up with regular check-ins, whether it's once a week or once a month, whatever makes sense for a cadence depending on your program, envision those second and third order effects. That's not something that you're sharing like, hey, funder, if this goes wrong and that goes wrong, like you don't want to over communicate those kinds of things because you want to demonstrate evidence-based confidence, right? Evidence-based confidence that I've done work like this before, or I'm doing this now based on all of the resources at our disposal. Evidence-based confidence allows you to keep things going and be proactive in your communication. And you also are doing regular check-ins with all of those stakeholders I've mentioned so that you're aligned, you're communicating, you're able to elevate challenges that you're encountering, and also you're able to show your homework, right? You're communicating how we're thinking through this challenge and how we're going to come out on the other end better for it and still deliver the outcomes that we've committed to. Okay, number 2, anticipate potential bottlenecks. This is very much like the second and third order effects. The first one is more like universal, like high level, like in the universe of all the bad things or good things that could happen, what could go great? We could be ahead of schedule. That would be awesome. And here's what that would allow us to do. On the other hand, here's everything that could go badly and how we could, some ideas that are percolating that we've maybe written down in a parking lot document somewhere so that we have access to think through those things when and if the need arises. Bottlenecks is more of the day-to-day, right? So I'm thinking specifically about deliverables and milestones. So specific activities you're doing, specific outputs that you may be producing, events, documentation, meetings, conferences. Think about the things that may prevent you from getting to those milestones, or capacity bottlenecks as well, right? Like we have 2 people working on this project, and both of them are going to be at different events. So how are we going to meet this deliverable? What are we going to do? What can be paused or shared to get to the place we want to go? I already mentioned always have 3 options. I sort of jumped the gun, so I apologize. Communicating proactively. We've talked about that as well. Again, this applies not just to your funder or your external partners, but it also applies to your colleagues, anyone who's helping you implement a specific grant. Again, sharing things that may feel uncomfortable at first. That goes into the emotional intelligence piece we'll hop to in a moment. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable, get curious, and ask open-ended questions to really get the best ideas at the table for how to move forward when plans change. And then apply grace liberally, right? Be kind to yourself first and foremost, right? Self-compassion is a term I've only come to know in the past 24 months, but it's so important, especially with this kind of work that can feel very overwhelming. There's lots of moving parts. So much of the work feels outside of your control, and yet you feel 110% responsible for the results. So giving grace to yourself when things don't go as planned, when you make a mistake, when you're short with somebody, when a colleague, messes something up and now you've got a lot of paperwork or extra hours to try to fix stuff. Again, we all struggle with this. We're all human beings. So just, again, thinking that through and showing up with that kindness and compassion will compound the joy and the impact that you're ultimately able to achieve. All right, next, I'm going to move these kind of quickly because I want to save plenty of time for Q&A and your thoughts. Number 3, this idea of complex collaborations, right? Any grant program, I think my business coach, Ed Gandia, maybe says that a project is anything with 2 or more tasks. And so if you think about a project as anything with 2 or more tasks, wow, that really opens your mind to just how much of our work, your work within Extension, my work within my business, is based around projects. And so all of these skills and mindsets that we're talking about today can be broadly applied, whether you are, going through a checklist, planning for an event with, these 3 things. I need to make sure the audio visual is all set. I need to make sure the stipends have been awarded. I need to make sure that we've got the topics locked in, whatever the case might be. Um, Complexity compounds when you've got multiple projects sort of moving within a program of work and all of the tasks that ladder up to those mini projects that result in the final outcome. So you can see quickly that why there's so much complexity here, why it can feel so overwhelming, because you feel obligated to track all of those things. But as someone pointed out in the chat, doing one thing at a time, having a plan, doing some of this advanced homework is going to put you light years ahead of so many others, not only in terms of getting the work done, but in terms of the calm you can feel that's possible. So a few recommendations here. First, focus on shoring up your core team, right? Yourself, get enough sleep, eat enough food, have enough proactive communication, plan for this, anticipate it. If you're getting awarded funding, I sure hope you spent time talking as a team about what the implications would be, the budget, the program of work, and getting alignment around those things. And again, you may still need to move forward and pursue funding, even though not everyone's on the bandwagon. You may even have some verbal detractors, right? That's very common. But again, the more you can encourage your team to think about the project management, give them clarity on what they are responsible for achieving, and then working together to move through those pieces of the puzzle to get you to the final completed grant program, the better off everyone's going to be. So it's often tempting to say, I got to go give the funder what they need right away. I just got an email from agency X. They need a response now. No, they don't. Like, there may be some cases where they do, but the reality is often like, we need to take care of those who are in our closest to us before we can start moving out to those outer rings that are still essential to the program, but do not actually have to do the work of getting the work done. Second, envision partners in concentric circles. So I've kind of hit on this already. Your first circle in the very middle of that target is you, right? You're sort of holding this and carrying it. If you are a leader, you've submitted and received funding, you're responsible for figuring out where in the world to get started. So you're in the middle. Then outside of that, the next circle would be your team. The next circle beyond that arguably is either your funding partner, right? The one who's making the work possible, making the investment in you and your team. And then beyond that, think about external partners. And honestly, if you're working closely with other partners to implement the work, there's probably a dotted line across from the center circles, you and your team, to that partner. Because again, if you are all well, the chances of you actually meeting the funder's objectives are better. And then of course, beyond that, the biggest circle of all, where you're hoping to have the most impact, is the social benefit you're providing through the work that you're doing. The next point, fuse your team and your partners smartly. Some partners go together like, peanut butter and jelly, and some partners are like, oil and water. You're going to hopefully be in a rhythm because you've been doing this for many years. You have expertise, you've built a great professional network. You're going to be able to have some intuition and some evidence about which partnerships are likely to be really strong and which ones may cause challenges, right? There may be personality conflicts. There may be, changes happening at your partner organization where people are coming and going. And so you may need to think through strategically how to pair people on your team or yourself with that partner so you can work most effectively. Again, communicate actively, address friction when it happens and nip it in the bud versus letting it fester. That's what I mean by fusing your team and partners smartly. Mitigate death by emails and meetings, right? I think we live in a Zoom culture, right? Ever since the pandemic and probably before then, meetings are great. Too many meetings I've experienced across, industries for, years, is that too often there's no agenda circulated before the meeting. There's no clear leader of the meeting, or if there is, the leader is maybe sort of coming in hot from their last meeting. There's not enough delegation of you lead this piece of the meeting and help us get to these outcomes. And that's the last piece, right? What is the outcomes and then the follow-up, right? Am I reporting back to the team about the decisions that were made? Thankfully, AI is helping a lot with this, summarizing meetings. Again, it needs some human review to make sure it's accurate. But, doing the basics, right? Putting an agenda in place, circulating that in advance, ideally getting feedback from the team around or others you work with and partner with around what topics to discuss, can make hour-long meetings, you can turn that into a 30-minute meeting or a 15-minute meeting. Or my favorite, the meeting's canceled. We're going to quickly catch up on Slack or email or send a quick phone call, and we'll take care in 5 minutes what it might have taken otherwise 60 minutes to sort of slowly work our way around the bush and eventually get there. Again, I think it's easy to think, well, I have to get everyone together. We have to talk this through. There's many times that's true, but we often undervalue individual time at our desk, taking a walk, thinking a problem through, and then coming to a meeting with, these are the insights, let's compare notes, let's figure out what needs to happen next. So I would say always err on the side of, can I cut this in half? Honestly, like, it feels really uncomfortable. It's going to feel like a risk. And it is, right? Treat it as a 30-day experiment and see what happens. You may be scared, and you may find that you have more time in your schedule to do the actual work of the program, the parts you actually enjoy. And you may have other, capacity just to take a breath, like someone mentioned in the chat earlier. ABC, made up acronym. Appreciate where you are, the fact that you have this opportunity to do this important work. Appreciate the people at the table helping you do it. Appreciate the clients who are going to benefit. Appreciate the funder for making the investment, right? Balance, right? Balance is maybe a misnomer, but this idea of, we're going to have really crazy seasons during this program, and I'm also going to make sure that we have time to take our vacations, right? We're sharing the load of this opportunity so people still have time to spend with their family and friends and breathing and eating lunch. These things are all very important. And then clarify, right? I mentioned definition of done. The more you can do to read people's body language, ask curious, open-ended questions, see where people are struggling, confused, or maybe just not on board, the more you can start to have those conversations out loud, be vulnerable, and figure out how to move forward in a way that's a win for everybody. Let me stop there. I know I've got a couple more points here, but I want to just take a moment and say, are there any questions that you're thinking about, or comments or thoughts that are coming to mind about any of this? I'm curious how this is hitting you. Is this resonating? Does this feel like stuff you've already figured out? Does it feel like something that has no clear endpoint and it's all just very frustrating? Where are you landing with all of this? So I'll take a break, and then I'll come back and address Paula's comment in the chat. And this is a lot to process, right? So I don't expect you to have any clearly formed hypotheses as yet. And that's totally fine. Paula notes in the chat a reminder that people can also be bottlenecks. Yes, right? There is nothing more frustrating as a leader, someone helping to get a grant implemented, than saying, where are we at on this project? Or, hey, can we set up a time to talk? And there's crickets, or there's excuses, or there is, I'm trying to think of other scenarios. Like, there's a whole host of things that can be challenging, and it can be really difficult, right? I mean, you may have to resort to calling someone in to help you, right? Have a conversation, or working through administration, or reorienting your scope of work, or whatever. Like, no one wants to be in that position, and yet the human part of these programs is often like, working with people and overcoming those bottlenecks, which is, there is never a cookie cutter solution. So very, very astute observation. Thank you for that. Okay, a couple more sort of groups of thoughts, and then I will pause and we'll move into Q&A. Intelligence reimagined, right? I'm talking about emotional intelligence. First of all, I recommend thinking that how you work with people is more important than what you know, right? I mentioned that earlier. There's lots of great reading material, podcasts, business leadership, there's lots of awesome talent within the extension system, extension foundation, key informants, and beyond, like tons of wealth and wisdom in working with people, in productively navigating conflict. Like, tap into those people. If you don't know who those people are, reach out to your friends at the Extension Foundation. I bet they could list you a dozen people, and probably twice as many or more, that could help you with specific topics based on what struggles or experiences you may be having. Next, what you know can be enhanced by how you work with people, right? How does the saying go? Like, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? I think that's, I forget who said that. Stephen Covey or someone along those lines. But at any rate, the idea is demonstrating and coming to the table again with curiosity, with kindness. I come from a family of fast talkers. Um, and so I've had to sort of train myself to try to like slow down a little bit, um, you know, and again, think about ways to show kindness and care. And again, once you do that, once you've established trust, then you can have the deeper conversations. Then you can start applying the expertise that you bring to a program. But to the points that were raised earlier about getting started, my position has been for quite some time that the more you start by building trust, getting to know each other, understand their perspectives, their background, their lives outside of extension, the better capable you will be of molding and putting together a puzzle that represents the team that's going to get the job done. Next, watch leaders you admire at work, right? Just observe. Be curious, like, hey, I noticed that you said this or did that. Like, tell me more about that. What did you mean by that? How has that helped you in doing this kind of work, right? So I think there are probably people within extension and even outside of that, whether it's in your, local community, your business community, faith community, whatever it might be, people you read or follow that you can learn from. And again, I think you can, in some ways by osmosis, right? By just modeling, listening, following, you can sort of ingest some best practices. Get curious about other humans, right? It can be very easy to get really frustrated, especially when it comes to those human bottlenecks. And it can also be an opportunity to say, I wonder why why this is happening. And, it's important, I think, to remember, we are not mind readers. So I have often been guilty of assuming I knew what people were thinking. And many times I've been proven wrong. So often the best way to know is to ask. I'll think about a book I read about this topic recently, but at any rate, get curious, make some observations, and then start to ask some questions and don't assume, right? Get the insight from the people that you're working with so that you can do your best work. And then practice, right? You get better by doing, right? You get better by falling down and learning and getting back up again. So keep those things in mind. I'm sure many of you are doing all of these things already, but I always need this reminder when things get particularly difficult. Finally, and then we'll move into Q&A. As I'm doing this, I'm going to give you a quick heads up. Melanie, if she hasn't already, will soon be dropping into the chat a survey. So please fill out, it's a brief survey for Extension Foundation, just giving them feedback on today's workshop, whether you found value, if so, what, etc. So please fill that out. I'll have a slide in a moment where I'd love some feedback from myself that helps me improve and deliver more value to you, but we'll get to that in a moment. So finally, devilish details. Know what your funder's minimum viable product looks like, right? Again, someone pointed out in the chat, think about what you've committed to doing, how you're going to get there. That has to come first, right? Before you start adding new things, which again, reduce the value or maybe add to the hours and the stress that you're already feeling, know what's expected and think about creatively options that will get us to deliver that program of work. Second, know your team's skills and play to them, right? It's not enough to know someone likes baseball or they have 3 kids. Those things are awesome, and I think you should know those things. But also know, what are their talents, right? Are they a project management whiz? Do they get along really well with someone in finance? Do they represent your organization exceptionally well in front of funders or external partners, right? We all have these innate gifts buried inside of us. Some may be more obvious than others. Some you may just have to learn by doing and having conversations and working together, right? Again, that's the first part of any program of work. Yes, you need to make progress and deliver outputs, but you also need to productively get to know your team so that sort of like a locomotive that takes a long time to gear up. Once it's racing down the tracks, you've taken the investment of getting those wheels moving, getting them all working in harmony together. The same is true for your grants team, so you can move further and faster as you go. And again, your team, I realize, may be just you and half of another person. But again, invest in that, right? Invest in knowing those skills and then playing to those skills. Prepare for multiple redos until it's right, right? So I'm of the opinion that the more you can start to get things in writing, the faster you can tear it apart and rebuild it even better. Again, doing independent desk work, then having a shorter meeting rather than sort of a winding conversation. Oftentimes, is more effective than having multiple winding conversations that eventually get us to the goal, right? Leverage the brain power, leverage the expertise, leverage the quiet people like myself who may not, you probably don't realize this, I tend to be a quiet introvert. Um, but leverage the people like that who maybe don't always speak up in meetings or feel, aren't sure if their ideas are good. Like, give them time to work and then bring those to the table so that everyone has a voice. Fourth, recruiting a dispassionate third party. So if you have someone within your extension system, someone within your university, a trusted external partner who can be a sounding board, whether it's a challenge you're facing, you can anonymize the specifics, but give them some flavor for what you're going through. I always love getting outside perspective from someone who's not intimately involved with my project, because they can often say things back to me with so much clarity that I completely ignored because I was just too close to it, right? So anytime you can get third-party perspective in a way that doesn't violate people's privacy or share, restricted information or whatever, I think there's a lot of value in just getting general observations and insights on human behavior, decision making, moving projects forward, etc. And then finally, and then I'll move into the Q&A, remember why you care so much about this, right? You didn't just come to Extension for a paycheck, I suspect, right? I mean, all of us need to put food on the table, pay our mortgages, hopefully invest in causes we care about, etc. But at the end of the day, Extension is doing work that matters to clients and communities all over the country, sovereign indigenous nations, territories, etc. So you come from diverse communities, you represent diverse needs, you're doing this for a purpose beyond just the work itself. And so never forget that that is the most important foundational detail. And if you can keep that true north, if you can keep working toward that piece by piece and doing it in a way that feeds your soul rather than sort of drains you of all of the energy you ever had, which too often is the way people lean, then I think you'll ultimately come out with grant programs that are more rewarding, more meaningful. And because you are making yourself whole and your colleagues whole, that will result in a stronger finished product. Funders will see that, and I think it leads to more opportunity financially, emotionally, socially down the line. So that's my presentation today. I know it was sort of a bit of a monologue. I appreciate your taking the time to walk with me. Again, I've been around the block a few times, and again, I hope something resonated and maybe some new ideas came out as well. Leadership insights, sort of summarizing all of this, not every day is going to be a good day. Be honest about that. Great outcomes are worth fighting for. The work you're doing matters, right? It's not just, you're not building widgets, although, many of us rely on widgets every day. So I love widgets and widget makers, but you're doing more than that, right? You're making generational impact that goes beyond your career, goes beyond my career. Your demeanor sets the tone, right? Humans have mirror neurons. We like to be like those around us, right? For better or for worse. And so understanding how the brain works, understanding human psychology, not manipulating that, but leveraging that as a tool that really makes everybody better and stronger is awesome. Strategize, then improvise, right? Too often we just say, I got to go send the email. I got to have the meeting. I got to do this. I got to do that. Okay, stop doing. Take a step back. Think about possible paths forward, and then move ahead once you have the best choice based on the information available to you at the time. And finally, vulnerability. If you don't know, say so, right? There are other people who complement your knowledge, who complement your skill set, your personality type. We're in this together, right? Extension is a tremendous community. Last I checked, something like 32,000 or more professionals. It's a tremendous resource. Don't undervalue that, right? Don't undervalue the tremendous wisdom collected here. All right. I mentioned the survey that Melanie typed into the chat. Please go ahead and fill that out first. It'll take you just a few minutes. And then if you have the ability to also take this quick survey on the screen for me afterward, that would be great. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to give you all a chance to breathe, and I'm going to ask for your questions, comments, and thoughts, because I want to make sure you have time to give your insights, and that anything this might have sparked in your mind, we have a chance to have a conversation around. So take a few minutes, fill out the surveys, and then in the next 2 minutes or so, we'll dive into Q&A. All right. So I know some people have to hop to other calls. Some of you, though, are have flexibility and graciously have stayed. So thank you for that. Um, while we're waiting for some questions to come into the chat, Melanie, I'm wondering, is there anything you saw or that stood out to you that maybe would be worth talking a little bit about here as we kick off the Q&A session?
I didn't see any questions we missed, but I know that people offered a lot of suggestions on how they manage their grants with different tools. And I wonder if anyone would want to expand on any of the comments they had.
I love that idea. I would love to take a few. So yeah, if you are willing to speak to one of the comments you left or something you've seen work really well, go ahead and unmute yourself and jump right in. And a round of applause for whoever decides to jump, be the brave one and jump in first.
I really liked this comment. Someone said they had a wonderful program lead that hosted a retreat and recently did a reflection check-in for our team that was really helpful to process and pause. And I know that you spoke to that a few times, Nate, the importance of the pausing and reflecting.
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. I really do love that comment and that concept as well. I wonder, do we still have that extension leader on the line? Would you be comfortable maybe sharing a little bit about what that process was like and maybe one key takeaway from that experience? And I'm thinking maybe they are not here with us anymore.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're not.
Um, Melanie, I mean, I guess I would say I think reflecting is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it is a forced pause. So, like I mentioned, and I'm sure many of you on this call can relate to this, um, you are doers, right? You're hired to do a job. I think extension professionals, in light of funding availability and all a variety of factors, are tend to be like work. I mean, to be candid, like you work really hard, right? You do a lot of things, you juggle a lot of hats, and so it's very tempting just to like dive in, keep going, power through the hard parts, and come out at the end of the day. You may be completely depleted, but the work is done, right? And you're proud of the work that you've done, as you should be. The problem comes when you are feeling, depleted, or when things just aren't working right. Um, and so, having a forced pause is just a professional excuse to breathe, first and foremost. And then it's an opportunity to say, what's working well, what's not working well. Um, and I think something that I've heard other people talk about is this sort of like the five whys. Like, why am I feeling stressed out? Well, because the deliverable that we promised to get to the funder by today is going to be late by a month. Okay, why is that causing me stress? Well, because we didn't follow what the RFP says. Well, why? Well, because these series of events happened and now we can't do it. Why? Okay, now why did those events happen? So you're sort of almost doing a forensic analysis of a challenge you may be facing or a feeling that you're having that you can't really explain. Um, what I found doing this exercise myself is it just gives me greater clarity. It lets me, to a point raised earlier, give myself and my team some grace, and also think sort of level-headedly about, okay, what's the reality versus what is my greatest darkest deepest fear that may never materialize. And it gives you a framework within which to begin planning the next action you're going to take to move in the right direction. So I love that you called that out, Melanie. I think that's taking a break, reflecting, and not just doing that once a year, but on a regular basis. Maybe it becomes a practice that you do as part of a team meeting every week or every month. Do a bit of a round robin and sort of talk through this idea of what's going great, like never forget to celebrate, and what's not working well that we could sort of solve together. So yeah, love that comment and the observation. Thank you, Melanie. I'll pause and ask again as our Q&A continues. Other questions, thoughts, comments, observations? Would love to hear some of your thoughts on things that are working for you or things that might be valuable to someone here on the call. Again, I think a lot of people are hesitant to say something out loud because they feel like maybe I'm the only one experiencing this. The reality, as I hope you've seen in the chat, is that everyone struggles with these same kinds of issues. Anne, I love that. Tell me about how, if you don't mind, Anne, I'd love to hear what hallelujah parties look like. It sounds like a great time.
Well, they take many different shapes. Sometimes it's just getting together for lunch and somebody bakes brownies or does something special. Other times it's a full blown go out for dinner and drinks and dessert and everything after work. But when something goes really well, you have to, as you said, never forget to celebrate. And I think the Hallelujah Party thing just kind of came out of something that got messy and
Uh-huh.
then got cleaned up. So I just, I love the phrase Hallelujah Party.
I am totally going to borrow that. And with full credit to you, of course, Anne. I love that idea, and thank you for sharing that, and also some of the different iterations or types of activities that it can take.
Yep.
So I think a few resources that might be helpful. Like Anne raised a really important point, which is I think what Tony Robinson, the self improvement guru, calls a pattern interrupt. Right? You're taking the day to day, which can sometimes get monotonous, no matter how much we love our work, and you're changing things up. Right? You're someone's making brownies, you're having a meal together, you're getting physically away from the space where you always work. You're spending time together in a way that doesn't involve like being at each other's throats or like being totally burnt out and not having enough sleep, whatever. So pattern interrupt, number one, benefit. Number two, there's a really great book that came out within the last 18 months or so called Unreasonable, I think it's called Unreasonable Hospitality, um, by a guy named Will Guidara, who is a restaurateur and who's developed this leadership practice for the restaurant business specifically. But there are lots of great insights in that book just about running an organization, working with people, overcoming challenges in really high pressure situations. And a lot of the culture that he cultivated through his restaurants was this idea of getting together, sharing food, like celebrating and really making it special and memorable, and not cutting corners. Right? I think we often, because budgets are lean and staff is lean, we tend to sell ourselves short. But if at all possible, like people are often willing to dig deep out of their own resources and time and talent to make something special and memorable that sort of buoys you on and recognizes all of your hard work and gives you that fuel you need for whatever comes next. So, Anne, love Hallelujah parties and love the vision behind that.